The morning sun cast long shadows across Somerton Beach as the waves gently lapped against the Adelaide shoreline. It was December 1, 1948, and what should have been another peaceful summer day in South Australia was about to become the beginning of one of the world's most baffling mysteries. John Lyon Bain was enjoying his usual morning walk along the beach when something caught his eye. There, slumped against the seawall with his back to the concrete, sat a well-dressed man. At first glance, Bain assumed the stranger was simply sleeping off a night of celebration. But as he drew closer, something felt wrong. The man's position was too still, too perfect, too final. The figure wore an expensive suit, impeccably tailored despite the circumstances. His tie was knotted with precision, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him spoke of refinement and attention to detail. Yet here he sat, motionless against the cold concrete, as if he had simply decided to rest and never wake up. Bain hesitated, then called out. No response. He moved closer, his footsteps crunching on the sand, and that's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The man's eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the horizon, but there was no obvious sign of injury, no blood, no violence. He looked as peaceful as someone taking an afternoon nap, except for the unmistakable stillness of death. The police arrived within the hour, their boots disturbing the pristine sand as they cordoned off the area. Detective Lionel Lian was among the first on the scene, and he would later say that in all his years of service, he had never encountered anything quite like this. The dead man appeared to be in his 40s, with a strong build and calloused hands that suggested physical labor, yet his clothing was expensive and well maintained. His brown hair was neatly combed, and he was clean-shaven. There was no identification on his person, no wallet, no papers of any kind. The only items in his pockets were a pack of Army Club cigarettes, a box of Bryant and May matches, some bus tickets, and a small piece of paper with a local phone number scrawled on it. But it was what wasn't there that made the case immediately suspicious. Every single identifying mark had been methodically removed from his clothing. The labels had been cut out with surgical precision from his suit jacket, his shirt, even his underwear. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure this man could not be identified. The post-mortem examination, conducted by Sir John Burton Cleland, only deepened the mystery. The man had died sometime between 8 p.m. and midnight on November 30th, yet his body showed no signs of violence, no obvious cause of death. His organs were congested, suggesting possible poisoning, but toxicology tests came back negative for all known poisons available at the time. Even stranger, the man's physical condition was remarkable. His calf muscles were unusually well developed, suggesting he was either a ballet dancer or someone accustomed to walking on his toes. His hands, while calloused, showed no signs of manual labor, and his fingernails were well manicured. Everything about him suggested a life of contradictions. As news of the mysterious death spread through Adelaide, the police launched an extensive investigation. They checked missing persons reports not just locally, but across Australia and internationally. They examined passenger lists for ships and planes, hotel registers, and contacted police departments in every major city. Yet no one came forward to claim the body. No one reported a missing person matching his description. It was as if this well-dressed, physically fit man had simply materialized on Somerton Beach with no past, no identity, and no connections to the living world. The investigation took an even stranger turn when railway officials contacted the police. A brown suitcase had been discovered at Adelaide Railway Station's cloak room, checked in around the time of the man's death. When police opened it, they found clothing that matched the style and size of what the dead man was wearing, but once again, every single identifying label had been meticulously removed. Inside the suitcase were several items that only deepened the mystery: a reel of orange thread of an unusual type not manufactured in Australia, a table knife that had been sharpened down to a thin blade, several pieces of clothing including a red dressing gown, and most puzzling of all, a stenciling brush of the type used by third officers on merchant ships. But perhaps the most intriguing discovery came weeks later. A local chemist named John Freeman was following the case in the newspapers when he remembered something odd. On the morning after the body was discovered, Freeman had found a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam in the back seat of his car, which he had left parked near Somerton Beach the night before. The book was a rare first edition of Edward Fitzgerald's translation, and Freeman was certain it hadn't been there when he parked. When Freeman contacted the police and they examined the book, they made a discovery that would transform the case from mysterious to absolutely bewildering. Hidden in the back of the book, in a small pocket that had been torn out, was a small piece of paper with two words printed on it, Tamam Shud. The phrase meant finished or ended in Persian, and it was the final phrase from the Rubaiyat. When investigators compared the paper to the book, they found that it had been torn from the very copy Freeman had discovered. But how had this book ended up in Freeman's car? And why had someone carefully torn out just those two words to give to the dead man? The mystery deepened further when police discovered that someone had used the book to write a coded message. On the back cover, written in pencil in block letters, was a series of letters that appeared to be some kind of cipher. WRGOABABD MLIAOI WTBIMPANETP MLIABOAIAQC ITTMTSAMSTGAB. Below this cryptic message was what appeared to be a phone number, though it had been crossed out so thoroughly it was barely legible. Cryptographers from around the world attempted to decode the message. Military intelligence agencies, university professors, amateur code breakers, and even early computer programmers tried every known cipher technique available. The message remained stubbornly indecipherable. Some theorized it was a one-time pad, others suggested it might be an abbreviation of a longer message, and still others believed it could be the first letters of lines from a poem. But despite decades of attempts, no one has ever successfully decoded what those letters mean. The investigation took another dramatic turn when police managed to trace the crossed-out phone number. It belonged to a woman living in nearby Glenelg, a suburb of Adelaide. When detectives knocked on her door, they encountered a young woman who would become known to the public only as Justin, though her real name was Jessica Thompson. Justin's reaction to seeing the Rubaiyat was immediate and visceral. According to the detectives' reports, she nearly fainted when shown the book. When she recovered her composure, she claimed she had given a copy of the same book to a man named Alfred Boxall in 1945, when she was working as a nurse during the war. But when contacted, Boxall was found to be alive and well, still in possession of his copy of the Rubaiyat, complete with Justin's inscription. Justin's story grew more complex under questioning. She admitted that she had known the dead man, though she claimed their relationship was brief and insignificant. She said she had met him in Sydney during the war and that he had been pursuing her romantically, but she had discouraged his advances. She insisted she had no idea why he might have come to Adelaide or why he might have her phone number. But there were problems with Justin's story. Neighbors reported seeing a man matching the dead man's description in the area around her house in the weeks leading up to his death. Some claimed to have seen him watching her house from across the street. Others reported seeing Justin speaking with a well-dressed stranger near her home. Even more suspicious was the timing. Justin had given birth to a son just months before the Somerton man's death. The child, Robin Thompson, bore a striking physical resemblance to the dead man, including the same unusual ear formation and the same distinctive gap between his upper front teeth. When questioned about the child's paternity, Justin became evasive and refused to discuss the matter further. The investigation into Justin's background revealed she had lived a somewhat mysterious life herself. Born in Sydney, she had worked as a nurse during the war but had been known to different people by different names. Some knew her as Jessica Thompson, others as Justin, and still others by entirely different names. She had moved to Adelaide shortly after the war ended, around the same time she became pregnant with Robin. As the months passed and the investigation stalled, theories began to multiply. Some suggested the Somerton man was a spy, possibly connected to the growing tensions of the Cold War. The timing seemed significant. 1948 was a year of increasing paranoia about Soviet infiltration, and Australia was becoming an important strategic ally to the United States. The man's physical condition, his apparent training in moving silently, and the careful removal of all identifying marks certainly suggested someone with intelligence training. Others theorized that the case was connected to a love triangle gone wrong. Perhaps the Somerton man was Robin's father, and his appearance in Adelaide had threatened Justin's new life. The poison that killed him could have been administered by someone who wanted to keep their secrets buried. The coded message might have been a love letter, or perhaps a threatening note, or even instructions for a meeting that turned deadly. But the spy theory gained credence when investigators learned more about the context of 1948 Adelaide. The Woomera rocket testing site was under construction not far from the city, and it was one of the most sensitive military installations in the Southern Hemisphere. British and American scientists were working on advanced weapons technology, and the area was known to be of interest to foreign intelligence services. The Somerton man's physical conditioning, his apparent ability to move silently, and his knowledge of poisons all suggested professional training. The coded message could have been intelligence communications, and his death might have been the result of a spy mission gone wrong, or perhaps the elimination of a double agent who had become a liability. The stenciling brush found in his suitcase took on new significance in this context. Third officers on merchant ships had access to ports around the world and could easily serve as couriers for intelligence services. Perhaps the Somerton man had been involved in smuggling information or people, using merchant vessels as cover for his activities. Dr. John Burton Cleland, who had conducted the autopsy, remained convinced that the man had been poisoned. The congestion in his organs, the way his pupils were dilated, and the peaceful expression on his face all suggested a fast-acting poison that would cause little pain. But the toxicology tests of 1948 were limited, and there were many poisons that would not have been detectable with the technology available at the time. Years later, advances in forensic science would reveal that the Somerton man's death was consistent with digitalis poisoning, a substance derived from foxglove plants that could cause cardiac arrest and would not have been detectable in 1948. Digitalis was readily available to anyone with knowledge of plants, and it would have been a perfect poison for someone who wanted to kill quietly and without leaving obvious traces. The investigation continued for months, then years, but no new leads emerged. The Somerton man was buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery in 1949, his identity still unknown. The case was officially closed in 1958, though it was never solved. But the story didn't end there. In the decades that followed, the Tamam Shud case became an obsession for amateur investigators around the world. New theories emerged regularly, each more elaborate than the last. Some researchers became convinced that the coded message was the key to everything, spending years trying to crack what they were certain was a sophisticated cipher. Others focused on Justin and her son Robin. As Robin grew older, his resemblance to the Somerton man became even more pronounced. When he died in 2009, his son agreed to provide DNA samples to compare with tissue samples that had been preserved from the Somerton man's body. But the results were inconclusive. The samples were too degraded to provide a definitive answer about paternity. The case took on new life in the internet age, as forums and websites dedicated to the mystery attracted thousands of contributors. Every detail was analyzed and reanalyzed. The unusual thread, the sharpened knife, the stenciling brush, the code, the book, Justin's evasive answers, all of it was dissected by amateur detectives convinced they could solve what professional investigators had not. In 2011, Adelaide University researcher Derek Abbott became obsessed with the case and began applying modern forensic techniques to the old evidence. Using advanced photographic analysis, he claimed to have identified several previously unnoticed clues, including what he believed were additional letters in the coded message that had been overlooked by earlier investigators. Abbott also focused on the rubaiyat itself, tracking down other copies of the same rare edition and discovering that very few had been sold in Australia. This suggested that whoever owned the book had either brought it from overseas or had connections to rare book dealers. It was another piece of evidence suggesting that the Somerton man was not a local resident but someone with international connections. The digital age also brought new attention to the poison theory. Medical experts re-examined the autopsy reports and concluded that the Somerton man's symptoms were consistent with several exotic poisons that would not have been detectable in 1948. These included rare plant extracts used by intelligence services, synthetic compounds developed during World War II, and even radioactive substances that were just beginning to be understood. Perhaps most intriguingly, researchers discovered that 1948 had been a year of significant intelligence activity in Australia. The Venona Project, a secret American program to decode Soviet communications, had identified several Soviet agents operating in Australia during this period. The Australian government was quietly investigating communist infiltration of unions and government departments. It was exactly the kind of environment where a spy might operate, and where a spy might end up dead on a beach with all identifying marks removed. In 2013, Abbott made a controversial claim that rocked the amateur investigation community. He announced that he had identified the Somerton man as H.C. Reynolds, an American who had disappeared around the time of the death. Abbott's evidence included photographic comparisons and circumstantial evidence about Reynolds' background. But when DNA testing became available, the results contradicted Abbott's identification, leaving the case as mysterious as ever. The most recent developments in the case have come from advances in DNA technology. In 2021, researchers announced that they had successfully extracted usable DNA from the Somerton man's hair samples. Using genealogical databases and advanced DNA analysis, They claim to have identified him as Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne who had a history of depression and had recently lost his wife. But even this seemingly definitive identification has been questioned. Other researchers have pointed out inconsistencies in the evidence, and the identification has not been officially confirmed by South Australian authorities. The debate continues, with some convinced that the mystery has finally been solved, while others maintain that too many questions remain unanswered. What makes the Tamam Shud case so enduringly fascinating is not just the mystery of the man's identity, but the larger questions it raises about truth, identity, and the secrets people carry. Here was a man who went to extraordinary lengths to conceal who he was, yet left behind a trail of clues that has kept investigators busy for more than 70 years. The coded message remains undeciphered. Justin took her secrets to the grave in 2007, never revealing what she truly knew about the man who died on Somerton Beach. The stenciling brush, the unusual thread, the sharpened knife, all of these clues point to a larger story that we may never fully understand. Perhaps that's what makes the case so compelling. In an age where digital surveillance and DNA databases make it nearly impossible to disappear completely, the Somerton man represents a different era, when it was still possible for someone to vanish from one life and appear in another without leaving a trace. His death on that Adelaide beach was not just the end of one man's story, but the beginning of a mystery that has outlived everyone who knew him. The beach at Somerton looks much the same today as it did in 1948. The waves still lap against the seawall where the unknown man took his final rest. Tourists and locals walk the same stretch of sand, most unaware that they're passing the site of one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. But for those who know the story, there's something haunting about that place. On quiet mornings, when the light hits the water just right and the shadows fall long across the sand, it's easy to imagine that well-dressed figure sitting against the seawall, carrying his secrets into eternity. The Tamam Shud case reminds us that even in our modern world of constant communication and surveillance, there are still mysteries that resist solution. Some secrets are buried so deep that they may never surface. Some codes may never be broken. And some men may take their true identities to the grave, leaving behind only questions and the haunting phrase that ended his story, Tamam Shud. It is finished. Yet the investigation continues. Somewhere in those coded letters, in the pages of that poetry book, in the memories of people long dead, the truth may still be waiting. The Somerton man's story is not just about one mysterious death on an Australian beach. It's about the eternal human fascination with the unknown, the unsolved, and the secrets that people will die to protect. And perhaps that's the most frightening aspect of all, not that we don't know who he was, but that someone, somewhere, went to extraordinary lengths to make sure we never would. In a world where anonymity is increasingly impossible, the Somerton man achieved the ultimate disappearing act. He became a ghost in reverse, a person who appeared from nowhere rather than vanishing into nothing. The case serves as a reminder that behind every mystery lies a human story, filled with love, loss, fear, and secrets that seemed worth dying for. The man on Somerton Beach may never be fully identified, but his story continues to live on, growing more complex and compelling with each passing year. As long as there are people fascinated by mysteries, as long as there are amateur detectives willing to spend years analyzing decades-old clues, as long as there are new technologies that might unlock old secrets, the Tamam Shud case will continue to captivate and confound us. And somewhere, in the vast silence of the unknown, the Somerton man keeps his secrets still.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey.